Hi, Sharon, you're right way up now. Others are coming back. Michelle, Alex, Anna.
I'm back.
You're back. Wonderful. Well, that technology is amazing. And a few words, any questions arising from that or any interesting discoveries? Simply remind me first that we're back on record when we're back in this. So share only what you want to share as part of the recording.
So I'll go first. Was quite interesting for myself is to sort of a growing awareness of how people make and how I've experienced myself make reactionary decisions versus which is heavily informed by the get rid of or get away from, as opposed to when I've made healthy, authentic decisions, which is very much with that get on with, and that's even when things are ugly or messy.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I've got some thinking from the discussion. I was wondering about the impact of individuals or groups' behavior on their okayness. And my understanding of the concept is that the okayness is not based on their behavior, but it's based on their inherent value as a person. And thinking that, so another concept which got me thinking even deeper with my thinking partner here was about how in our cultures we have an inherent belief that our culture is superior to another culture. I think there are behaviors which are superior to other behaviors, and those may be very strongly linked to culture. For instance, systems of punishment and legislation in some cultures, I think, aren't superior to those in other cultures where evidence is brought to a trial and people have a punishment or some kind of method put in place to help them grow, like seeing a therapist or spending time in a facility which gets them out of the old behavior. So it makes it the concept of okayness quite difficult to distinguish when I think we kind of make judgments really based on behavior so quickly and ascribe a value to a different culture. And when people in the other culture, well, it's easy to paint people with the same brush if they dress the same or talk the same or look the same.
Thank you. You've raised some very important points about cultural relativism. First of all, yes, the I'm okay, you're okay, and the we're okay, you're okay is definitely about intrinsic human value. But that in itself is a culture. That is a TA culture. We actually hold as part of our TA cultural parent that that's an important value to hold. Not all cultures hold that value, that all people are intrinsically equal in human value. Many do, but not all. And so we're already into issues of modernity versus non-modernity, or different cultural perspectives and cultural values. And that's kind of another whole question all in itself. I think what we can do in TA is differentiate between my values, which I might think of as a parent function, and information, rather than allowing a contamination to happen between our adult and our parent value system, such as that we cannot see the difference in those two cultural values and allow them space differently. We agree to differ. Does that address some of what you're saying?
Yes, I think it does. And I'm wondering, put on top of the concept of the OK crawl, what position we take when we are able to see where we are from a meta perspective.
See where we are?
From a meta perspective.
Yes.
Or even if that's relevant to the model. And of course, every model has its limitations.
In a way, by asking you to look at the model and think about yourself and look down on yourself in relation to, I was asking you to take a meta perspective. And I think that is part of the value of using this tool with groups, is to ask them to take that kind of meta perspective. And in the end of the day, with cultural relativism, I think my touchstone would be what allows humans to thrive? Where, in what context, what kind of things allow humans to thrive? But we're coming to that later, but not right now. Okay. Any other questions and comments so far?
This really just struck me from an organizational point of view, thinking about when I used to run training programs when I worked in tourism. And it's more the culture of the organization, I suppose. And just thinking about how I moved up the hierarchy of the company and how my lens just completely changed until I was in a position of training people. And then suddenly, yes, I have this knowledge, but you're going to have it by the time we're done. So we're all in this together, which was a much more helpful and when I see on the run, but not at the lowest rung, and we're so much better than they are, type of thing. And it was, this could be so useful in an organizational setting.
Great, because one department or one level of hierarchy. I've used it with parents and teachers, and that's very interesting in governing bodies. The teachers want to put all the blame on the parents, and the parents want to put all the blame on the teachers. That was fascinating. Any other comments? Something I didn't say when I was sharing the diagram with you, because I thought it might come out from your own interactions, possibly it did, but I'll just sort of tie it up with this now, is the way in which we can flip from one side to the other and be in we're okay, they're not okay in relation to one group, and we're not okay, they're okay in relation to another group. I'm thinking, for instance, particularly of the difficult position of the so-called colored people in our country, who were one down in relation to the whites, but were able to be one up in relation to the blacks. And I've heard people recently saying, colored people from the Cape saying, we weren't white enough for the whites and now we're not black enough for the blacks. Where are we? And they have really struggling with not being able to just be, we're okay, they're okay, you plural are okay. Some obviously are, but many are struggling with that right now, in the shift in their position. I see you nodding, Leo.
Yes, definitely. And what came up for me in this discussion was also around how we learn culture through a set of rules around behaviors. What do you do and what don't you do? And if you do this, then you're okay. And if you do that, then you're not okay. And people are put into groups in that way. But it's actually on a very outer level of what you see. And what's behind that, the actual values and where those rules come from sometimes get lost. But they make us go into either the I'm not okay and they're okay, or the I'm okay but they're not okay, and we keep jumping between them. And it can be quite confusing.
Yeah. And that ties back into Alex's question as well about how we do that. And it also follows on very neatly to what I want to talk about next, which is the importance of the cultural parent and how this stuff is transmitted. Are we ready to move on to that? Okay, cool. Okay, so the next piece I'm going to share with you is about the cultural parent. Now, Byrne originally had a useful drawing about the cultural parent, which you will see in a moment. And Pearl Drego then built on that to show how the cultural parent actually becomes interjected, becomes part of who we are and how we function. So in a sense, is also becoming part of our script. And how what we internalize there becomes key in how we create our frame of reference, our script. And particularly, I want to emphasize the importance of the frame of reference. And something that we're going to look at is the cultural frame of reference. Everybody here familiar with the term frame of reference from the shifts? I know it's not a term that's perhaps commonly used in organizational. Is it, Aaron or Alex?
I think I need a reminder.
You need a reminder. Okay, well, I may give a little quick reminder of frame of reference basics before we get on to cultural frame of reference. Thank you for clarifying that for me. Okay, so let's take a look at share screen with the cultural parent. No, that's not what I wanted. How do I go on? I'll just go zooming through. There we are. Cultural parent. At the top, you will see the familiar Byrne idea of the cultural parent, that we internalize a P2, which provides the etiquette. The etiquette is the sort of do's and don'ts and what's polite and how do we do things and what's our norm for behavior. It may involve a lot of things to do with understanding status and hierarchy and where we fit in the scheme of things. Technicality is about how we go about doing those things. And character is about the sort of feel of our culture. So it may be, for me, it's much more about sensory things in a way. It's about the food, the kind of humor, the fears. What are the fears in our culture? What do we fear? What do we find disgusting? That's a very basic kind of child response sometimes. But I think people are not allowed to talk about enough. Because I think actually unless we talk about honestly about some of these almost instant reactions to certain foods or jokes or loudness of the way people talk or the quietness of the way people talk, those kind of things, we're missing some of what we need to talk about. So the etiquette, say for, I had a wonderful example of this recently. I went to a wedding in the Eastern Cape, and the etiquette of how the wedding was conducted was entirely different from the etiquette of a wedding that I would normally expect to attend in my familiar culture. So first of all, there were large numbers of tables provided for people who might just turn up uninvited. And anybody who knew about the wedding was free to turn up. There were invited guests, formal invitations and all of that kind of thing. I can only imagine the horror that would ensue at my son's wedding, which we're planning for in the States sometime in August. Suddenly a whole pile of local people who had heard about the wedding decided to pitch. So quite a different etiquette about weddings. technicality meant that there had to be a lot of extra food, extra tables, and an awareness of that. Character was that people were very warm, very welcoming. Had strangers pitched, they would have been warmed and welcomed as well. The food was very plentiful. There was a lot of noise, very loud music and laughter and talking and so on that would have been at a different level of volume from what I would normally be used to in a sort of typical white wedding. However, it was also beautifully varied in that there was wonderful cultural blending of, I was in a very formal Western white dress, etc., etc. And there was a formal, sort of service. And then there were also lots of tribal components from their particular clan group that had to be included, and particular types of songs and dancing and so on. So it was a beautiful example for me of how etiquette, technicality, and character can vary from one culture to another. I'm sure you all would have had experiences of being aware of your own and seeing, as I say, seeing other cultures helps to highlight our own. However, Pearl expanded this to look at how that etiquette and character become very early and very firmly embedded in our little P1 in ways that then often find us difficult. We find it difficult to question them or to assimilate them if we're then in another culture or adapt them because they're right in there in the parent, adult, and child, if you like, of our P1. The etiquette, the technicality, and the character embedded in our P1, which may result if there are strong etiquettes and character stuff that we are not allowed to do or are limiting in any way, might become quite a severe impasse for us in later life if we have to move to another culture or choose to make some adaptations. For instance, one of the etiquettes of my cultural parent around my parents and for my mother, that was a wonderful mix of white and Zulu, although she was white, but she'd grown up in Zulu culture. And the role of children was very tightly constrained. Etiquette and technicality and character that was not unfamiliar to other people, perhaps in Victorian England. Children should be seen and not heard, and very deferential to elders, and not calling elders by first names, always giving way to elders. In my later years, that became quite an impasse for me around shifting those attitudes. So that's how the P2 can become very embedded as part of an almost unrecognized aspect of child's self that we don't even realize where it came from. But it was culturally determined in that kind of way. The superiority, in the culture in which I grew up, the obvious superiority of white people was the norm. That was just assumed. And there were all kinds of things that went with that. In changing it, and I had to grapple not only with P2, but also with P1. I'm going to, I think, put that off for a moment now and just find out if there are any questions in relation to that.
If I heard you correctly, you've said that there was a link in between the false self and the cultural parent, and I think it's a very important link, because it is the case, from my understanding, for as long as the person is not really aware that there is an influence. The minute they become aware, they are ready to make a choice. So this moment is very important, because the minute they make a choice, this is not a false self anymore. This belongs to them. So that awareness is very crucial.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you. Absolutely. Absolutely. That is really significantly what this is about.
Mm-hmm.
And any other questions before I go on?
I can say one more thing about false self. This is something that I had in a webinar that I've attended a couple of months ago. It was in England, Susie Orbach. She spoke a lot about false self in the context of social media, and how social media are a platform for growth of false self. They actually create very fertile environments for people to develop false self. So I think it's also very important to observe social media from the perspective of a platform, when you can see countless examples of false self being distributed all over the place. I'm not saying it's 100% accurate and everybody's transacting with others from the perspective of false self, but I think it's a very interesting observational platform for people to tell the difference and to be able to basically spot what's going on.
Thank you, Anna. And in fact, of course, that whole thing has now in large measure become part of our cultural parent.
Absolutely.
And so I think that is a very, very important thing to consider. Somebody else was also indicating, was it you, Karen?
Yeah,
oh, Alex.
As I understand, the messages in P1 are often pre-verbal. And what we noticed in our work with the community carers, that they could make new sense of the internalized attitudes and roles in A2, but because they were pre-verbal, there was something about working creatively with clay that seemed to enhance the new meaning that they wanted to make. Is that
absolutely lovely example?
Cultural shadow.
That's why I often use collage work or drawing or play work when working with groups. And on gender reconciliation, for instance, where we're working with gender diversity and struggles around gender, we use clay work. Well, I use clay work there as well. Yeah, it's very, very helpful. Thank you.
I've got a question about real world issues. There's an opportunity in the webinar to talk about the practicalities of the concept, or is it something that's done outside of the webinar?
I'm not sure I understood your question.
So I'm referring to specifics of things taking place in South Africa at the moment about, and the topic is cultural appropriation, or what's sometimes also called cultural misappropriation, and how that fits in here. But I realize that could be quite a lengthy discussion. So I just want to know if there's an opportunity.
It could be quite a lengthy discussion, so I think perhaps we won't embark on it here, but what a very fascinating question. And you might have a chance to deal with it a little bit in your pairs that you're going to go into shortly. And I'm going to give you a particular exercise. But before we go to that exercise, I want to look at Pearl Drego's emphasis on the cultural parent. Is very much on unhealthy cultural parent and how it might inhibit us and limit us and create a false self. I'm interested also in, and I'll give you an exercise around this in a moment. I'll first give you her unhealthy cultural parent definition. She also doesn't talk about the fact that there might be 2 or 3 cultural parents for a person, which I think is really quite interesting and quite important. Someone growing up, for instance, with parents from two very different cultures, they have two cultural parents that are quite divergent. And what does that mean for what's integrated, and how is that integrated into P1? For instance, I grew up in a very non-religious household. My mother, as I said, had a lot of Zulu traditional stuff and was a sort of nature worshipper. At my school that I went to was a Catholic convent. And so I had a very religious Catholic parent as well. I went to that from young. So I had this very religious Catholic parent and this heathen, the nuns used to refer to me as the heathen, this heathen parent, which was quite different. And also my English background parents, for example, thought Churchill was the most wonderful man and savior of Western Europe and best prime minister Britain ever had. And the nuns had him down as a war criminal who oppressed the people of Ireland. So, Churchill must fall was what I grew up with on the one hand, and Churchill is the best ever on the other. So this is also something to think about in terms of how we manage different cultural parents. And I personally feel myself to be hugely enriched by having dissonant cultural parents. Somewhere along the line, I managed to make some kind of sense of them. And it gave me choices in a way that I think just having one cultural parent perhaps doesn't give you an opportunity to develop that sort of questioning meta perspective of why is one saying this and the other saying that. I'm not saying that's always the case. Sometimes I think it can be a significant challenge for people. So I'm going to go now to the unhealthy cultural parent, and then we'll come back to this and then go into groups. Okay, so share screen. No, I don't need to do that again. I've already got this. I just need to go down to, here we are, the unhealthy cultural parent.
Di, you do still need to share your screen because what's on your laptop hasn't come through yet on your desktop.
Okay, sorry, so I have to go back to, where do I go back?
You might need to minimize your display, otherwise you can't get to the share screen button easily, if I remember right.
Perhaps I have to go to, perhaps I go to here. No, that doesn't help me either. Sorry, I'm going to end the show and come back in on it. I think that's my best bet. Where am I on screen now? I think I should be there. Nope. Here.
So to start your share screen before you find it, sometimes works better. You know what I mean?
Okay, I'm not able to get back to the whole picture of
all of us on Zoom.
Yeah.
I
don't know what's going on here. Perhaps I diminish that.
Try and escape.
You're behind. I've only got you for some reason.
And if you hover down the bottom, you don't have all the options.
I've only got a tiny picture of you. I'm sorry, I seem to have screwed up here.
Any other ideas?
Oh, exit minimize. Ah, there we go. Found it. I'm learning. Okay, so I need to go now to share screen, and hopefully it'll be on my desktop.
Looking good.
What have you got?
Desktop. We can see your desktop.
Desktop.
You can see my desktop icon. Okay, there's the unhealthy cultural parent. I'll just make it a bit like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here we go. Yeah.
So can you all see it fully, or should I read it out?
No, it's visible. It's okay.
Okay, good. I think we probably all have some idea of cultural parent or parent interjects from our culture that may have had these qualities. And this brings us again to things like cultural relativity and what is healthy and life-giving and what is not. Now, whichever way I try to be respectful of other people's cultures, I personally cannot find female circumcision life-giving or healthy. Within the context of the culture, I understand the women do this to the girls because they assume that's the only way they're going to be able to get by. But is it to being the best way for women to live and to reproduce? There are clear indicators health-wise that it is very seriously unbeneficial. I'm taking an extreme example to make the point. There are many other small ways in which, for instance, I've heard many clients of mine who were clearly damaged by being physically horribly beaten and abused when they were children, boarding school or at home, saying, oh, well, I was beaten about, it didn't do me any harm, and are quite willing to send their children off to the same boarding school because they've built up the defenses around that. And yet, I can see that they're in therapy for a reason. and what is that reason? So that's the unhealthy cultural parent that would keep that going. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. Okay. What did I say about that? Anything more about the questions about that before I ask you to have your little discussion? In the same pairs as before, I think. Is Kirsty?
It struck me that that was very much a controlling parent. And I'm wondering on the other side, the marshmallowing parent, how that might play out. Because the one point was take responsibility for others that they could take for themselves, which I would think is under marshmallow, but I just can't think of an example of how that would play out.
I can give you a very good example of how that would play out. There was a man in prison in Polesmore that I was working with for a period of time who talked all the time about his amazing, wonderful mother that he loved, and she was the best woman in the world, and he loved her beyond anything, and he'd do anything for her, and so on and so forth. And he started to talk more about her, and about how even when he was little, if he broke the neighbor's window, she would cover up for him. And when he attacked somebody, and she gave him an alibi. And so this amazingly wonderful mother had landed him in Polesmore, through never teaching him limits or responsibility in any way at all, for example.
I'm thinking of the stereotype of the Jewish mother.
That could be another possibility.
Background, yeah.
Yeah, okay, possibly. Okay, so that's the unhealthy cultural parent, which could be unhealthy marshmallowing or unhealthy controlling. I agree with you. What I'm going to invite you to do now, simply because I've never done this before, and I thought it'd be, well, I've thought about it myself, but I've never done it as an exercise with a group, is to ask you to discuss what you think would be a really healthy cultural parent that would preferably not create a false self and would encourage healthy, thriving development. So 10 minutes for that.
We'll go into the same rooms as before.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I think it's easier.